So our second topic for today is going a little bit more, specific about transitions. And since our game is not going to be really interactive, maybe things like these flourishes or stingers are less critical. But transitions are actually larger chunks of sound that are needed to stitch two musical materials from two scenes where we haven't really planned that transition before, or maybe we took it into account as a possible transition, but we couldn't compose this in a linear way because we were not sure when the first scene will stop and the second scene will start, and we were not even sure if we go from scene 1 to 2 or scene 1 to 3. So how can we kind of create all these transitions? We basically sort of like designate a section and we say, well, music of scene 1 can end here, but to move towards section 3, let's say, we insert a transition. So here are some examples of different types of transitions. Again, I will just tell you briefly what they are, but you should go and kind of listen to them and maybe pause and then go back and forth, because there are slightly different transitions. Even in this video, there's more than one transition technique. One is really when the scene ends, before the player starts the next control, you let the music play out and finish, and only after it's finished, you enable the player to move with these actions to the next scene. So somehow the music controls the interactivity or freezes the interactivity to let the music finish. Another one is, this is kind of sometimes referred as cutscenes. I don't know if I can kind of quickly jump to some kind of transition. Let me see if I can remember where it is, just to give an idea. Let me see, where's the music? Yeah. So it starts with the dark, just a second. Yeah, so this ends, and there's this like opening scene that while it happens, basically the music has to play on its own until it kind of allows us to get started with the new segment. Yeah. And somewhere from here you start, you will see that, well, it's evidently you can start moving the character. So that this kind of a transition that allows us to go from the night to the day with this kind of music that blends or allows for these changes between the two different musics with very limited control. It's like one example. More examples from Batman. Actually, there are two videos here, so you can just go and check them out. See basically when the battle stops or when the battle starts, the actual ending of the battle, and when the Batman moves, and you can hear every time you see, and there are several elements of this synchronization or this transition with synchronization, where you can kind of notice. So try to find these moments and go back and forth and see that actually, once you realize, you can see that actually, they're very much the same. I mean, the software actually triggers the same transition, but of course that transition is triggered by by the actions of basically Batman finishing the battle, and there is kind of a drum hit there, and then you move on. So this ability to exit the battle and move to the music of him like moving through the town and looking for this next battle scene and that ending is actually dynamic. And in this one, there's another example of a cutaway scene where, again, there are also transitions between battles, okay? And I mentioned the percussive stinkers triggered when Batman enters the fight scene, and again, the end of the combat scene. And at 4:44, so I did put the time here so I don't have to search for it. There is this cutscene where everything stops. So let me see, where is the 4:44? Is somewhere, it should be in the middle. Yeah, so somewhere here. So this is really, nothing happens in the game. That's a cutscene. They talk, the music happens. There's nothing of the interaction that can happen here, because this is kind of moving the story forward, and the music is predetermined here. So this is described here in the text. Kind of check out these elements, and once you start noticing them, you can kind of understand how you can also do your own design. Speaking about how transitions are related to musical materials, a little bit more of like a composer skill set or toolkit. We spoke about, melody first, harmony first, rhythm first, as different approaches to starting your composition. And again, they're not exclusive, and this is not the only way to do this, but it's kind of natural to think, about this is one option, one possibility to imagine your music, your musical intent. Same kind of thinking also applies to trying to plan your transitions. So if you are now dealing with creating a transition in a music that is heavily melodic, so you think about transition as melody first. So this is now transition melody first, transition harmony first, and not the composition itself. So if the music is heavily melodic, it's going to be very hard to suddenly cut the melody and move to another scene. Melodies have their own kind of inertia. They have to finish. It's like a phrase. You don't cut the sentence in the middle. It kind of leaves you hanging there, waiting for some kind of a meaning to emerge. So you probably want to let the melody finish until the end of the musical phrase, only then move to the next scene. So in some sense, the transition is synced to music, but music dominates. You actually have to finish the music and then move to the next one. Harmony is slightly different, and also it might require some knowledge of harmony, because harmony is, we said, it's just a sequence of chords, but there is this idea that chords basically have progressions. We spoke about this. And then maybe you move to the 5, and then you want to finish at the 1, so you have this cadence or the endings of harmony. So even though they're not as hummable or memorable as melody, and you might kind of switch out of harmony a little bit more unnoticed, you might still be wanting to see if there is really a strong movement towards an ending, a chord that's supposed to end something. You might want to finish that as well. So that kind of requires a little bit more of ability to analyze music in terms of its kind of theory, the harmony theory. But one way to avoid this is really kind of, instead of moving towards chords that really require resolution, start blurring the harmony. So if you start now having, and again, I apologize for those who are not musically, knowledgeable enough to make sense out of this, but for those who do have musical background, like if you start playing with chords like diminished and augmented chords, and you know that these chords exist, right? In LMS, we have seen them. So here is kind of like a little hint about, how musicians use these chords. So such chords like diminished and augmented chords, they kind of take you outside of that strong harmonic structure. Now they can be resolved into many other chords. So there are ways basically to change your harmonic progression in a way that now becomes less of synchronized or less of a demanding some specific continuation of events. And then if you do this, and then you can also blend this with melodies, you're going to move from a strong progression like you had maybe in the themes in the second assignment. And also when I asked you in the quiz maybe to analyze sections, some of these sections have really clear themes beginning and end. But if you want to start now blending the kind of, not blending, but blurring the ending, and there are some tricks to do, kind of you move from this to something that we have seen also in the prelude. Prelude was a little bit kind of like free floating. So there are the ways to do this, and you need some notion of harmony for that. Rhythmic transitions are especially hard if you have changes in tempo. Yeah, unless you can double the tempo and still keep the beat, which is one trick. But if you really change the tempo from one BPM to another BPM, which is not like just doubling, it becomes kind of a sudden jerk. So such a transition requires also a bridge. It requires something that will move you into an area where you don't have a clear tempo, clear beat, and then you can start accelerating things until you, or maybe decelerating things. You can go from fast to slow until you hit the next destination. So you kind of think about these things, and you know, by designing such a transition, one thing is no matter what your musical skill is, just by being able to identify these elements as maybe the dominant structural elements of the music, and then doing something to resolve one of them, that's already, if we do this, I feel that, we accomplished a lot in this class, because you will take this home with you also just for listening to any kind of music. You can start understanding how music is constructed. So some of the music appreciation aspects. And some examples. So here's a little video. This was F mode example of handling transitions. So you can kind of see how these things are done in real software. And oh, sorry, this is in Wise. This is Audio Kinetic. Okay, that's a different software, and I'll demonstrate some stuff later on in other software, just so you can get a feel of how this is integrated. But again, once you go into one of these software, it really requires you to address a lot of details. So this is why it's really beyond the scope of what is needed for this class. Yeah, some references here, and I'll switch to questions.